Hey guys, Father Patrick here,
This is Father Joseph Anthony.
and welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all who support us. If you enjoy our podcast, please consider making a monthly donation to us on Patreon. You can find links over at godsplaining.org. Otherwise, be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcasts. Good evening, Father Joseph Anthony. How art thou?
Oh, I just peachy keen tonight. How about you?
Just peachy keen tonight. Well, I'm coming off of the high of what was truly an amazing week for us last week. That was absolutely fantastic. We had, for listeners who don't know, who didn't see it on social media, the province of St. Joseph gathered for a provincial assembly, which means that the majority of the friars of the province, the vast majority, almost everybody, basically, you have to have a really good reason not to be there. Everyone from the province gathers together in Washington, D.C., and it's a time for fraternal renewal and for prayer. So there's kind of a retreat-like atmosphere, but also a lot of hanging out. Father Joseph Anthony, what did you enjoy most about the assembly?
I mean, whenever I mentioned, we had the assembly, especially to family or friends or things like that, they were always like, oh, what were the decisions you made, or what did you vote on? And this assembly is not a legislative event for us. It is a fraternal event. So the whole goal of it is to get the brothers together and allow them the opportunity to spend time with each other and to be renewed in their fraternity. And I would say that was pretty much accomplished. I felt renewed in my fraternity. And spending time with each other. We had a few very good conferences. All of our conferences were wonderful, from the Master of the Order himself, which was great. And the Archbishop of Sydney was also visiting because he was going to celebrate. He was the ordaining prelate at our ordinations at the end of the assembly. So they both of those men addressed us as a province, and they were beautiful reflections and meditations for us, but also led to great fraternal moments amongst the brethren themselves.
Yeah, I think it's a man thing to not want to go for like a hangout. I know that sounds silly, but there's a lot of resistance. Like, what are we doing here at this thing? What's the purpose? Oh, you mean it's just for us to get to know each other, brother, and do something fraternal? And all of that just sounds like a lot of things I'm not actually interested in. I mean, the hanging out with the brothers I do love, but with everybody, when it's according to this set schedule, I mean, the whole thing just didn't actually feel that great in terms of the generic idea. But this gathering could not have been better run. Father Bonaventure,
yes,
and Father Jonah just did an amazing job bringing us all together and allowing us to really dive in and have, again, all of those conversations and fraternal moments that you can't really put a price tag on or describe or value. I mean, it was incredible. And then, as you said, Father Joseph Anthony, the week concluded with the ordination of our brothers. And I thought that would be a great topic for us to jump into and to kind of unpack tonight, because it's not just the Dominican fathers who have their ordinations. We're entering ordination season. It's a little bit, it's a little bit wedding season, but it's kind of always wedding season. But this is really
real ordination season. Yeah, it only happens once a year.
Exactly, because everyone, the guys finish up with their classes, they come home from Rome, and so you get a lot of priestly ordinations through the end of May and early June. When you look through the catalogus, the directory of the Dominican Friars of our province, you just see all these May, June dates for anniversaries. So for us, it's really been at this moment a long time. Father Joseph Anthony, you assisted as an MC at the ordination mass. Maybe you could set the scene for us and tell us a little bit about, just from the get-go, and then we'll get into the particulars, but why an ordination mass is so special.
Yeah, it was a beautiful opportunity. We were lucky enough to hold the ordination in the upper church of the Basilica Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. So that's a place that is right across the street from our House of Studies in Washington, D.C., and it's the largest church in the Western Hemisphere. So it's a grand venue to celebrate such a grand occasion. But it was a really kind of arresting to see how many chairs were set up for the concelebrants. It was very nostalgic. I mean, the two of us were ordained in that same upper church, so it kind of brought back a lot of the good memes in that way. But seeing all of the concelebrants vest before mass in the sacristy, and then we had to line them up, and there were so many concelebrants that we could not line up in the sacristy, which is a large sacristy. This is not a little closet sacristy in a country church, so we had to line them up all through the upper nave, or the upper sanctuary and around, and I had to walk up and down those lines a few times, handing out programs or just making sure that people were in the right order and things like that. And that was a long walk back and forth, and there were a few moments where it was really impressive, and just it kind of reflect that we had over 200 concelebrants in that moment, and we filled the main sanctuary with concelebrants, and it's a really beautiful moment to see all of the priests coming together, not just to celebrate these individual men who were ordained. We had 7 of them, so these 7 men, but to really share their priesthood. And there's a few moments that we can talk about where it's really poignant that all of the priests get to share their priesthood in welcoming these new ordained men. But yeah, it was a kind of, there were a few moments, just the spectacle of it, if you want to call it that, the size, both of the number of concelebrants, the church, the size of the organ, and the music, all of it played into that. And it was a really beautiful weekend and beautiful day for sure.
Now, strictly speaking, of course, the concelebrants aren't necessary for the making of priests. You just have to have a validly ordained Catholic bishop, and he can validly ordain men to the priesthood. But they add a lot, as Father Joseph Anthony is saying, to the color of the day and to the scale. And for the priests who can celebrate, it's very beautiful. Mm-hmm. Of course, I was taken back right back, as Father Joseph Anthony was describing, to the day that we were ordained, especially because the opening hymn was the same. That beautiful hymn, Lauda Jerusalem, which is just so wonderful. And with the great organs of the basilica, you just feel that hymn. So being in the same place and hearing the same hymn sung took me back to the beginning of our ordination mass. One of the things I remember about that mass is crying a lot, and I remember Father Joseph Anthony crying a lot.
I do cry a lot. Yeah. I'm a crier. Okay, I'm a crier. Hate me.
Those are the two facts I remember.
Now, Father Patrick, you were also a master of ceremonies at the same liturgy, but you were working mostly with the deacons in the newly ordained. I was working mostly with the bishops. Were there any kind of moments with those men as they were receiving it? Because you had a kind of unique perspective and unique engagement there through that mass.
Yeah, we had to play zone. One of the things that I appreciate about that division of labor is being able to be close to the ordinandi, because you see, of course, the whole of the rite unfold. So it leads us to the various questions that are asked and the way the men respond to. But one of the things that I saw on Thursday during this ordination mass, one of the things that you typically see is the kind of reverence that the men have before God on this day. I mean, this is a fearful thing. If you're a believer and you're doing something like that, it's not merely the glory of the priesthood that you're encountering, although there's that, the priesthood is an extraordinary thing, but you also know that you are being changed in service to it, and that your life will never be the same again. Your life will never be the same again. And watching that unfold, and watching men realize that that's unfolding before them, that's for me in part of what's so powerful. In terms of the actual rite of ordination, Father Joseph Anthony, is there anything that sticks out to you that you want to draw our listeners' attention to?
Yeah, there's a moment that makes, I think, most of the people in the congregation very uncomfortable, because it's the moment where all of the concelebrants join in the laying on of hands. And so when we look at the rite of ordination, each individual man goes up to the bishop, and the bishop has to lay his hands on the head.
So there are the prayers, promises of fidelity, right? And then a litany of saints is sung, and then comes the moment that Father Joseph Anthony is describing.
Yeah. And so when we look at, the ordination, it's the laying on of hands and the prayer of consecration. Those are the crucial moments. Um, and so when the bishop does that, he does it in silence. So each individual man, and once again, in our case, we had 7 to be ordained. And shout out to the Diocese of Arlington, Virginia. They had 12 the weekend after us. So great opportunity for them. But we had 7 men, and they each come up to the bishop individually, and in silence, he lays his hands on their head, basically transferring his priesthood to them. And then they go back, and then in silence, they all kneel, and then the rest of the concelebrants are invited to do the same. And so all of us as priests, then as concelebrants, then we kind of go through the line and spend a moment to lay our hands on those men as well. And that's just a really, really beautiful moment where you pray for this man, pray for his priesthood, both inviting him into your priesthood and sharing your priesthood with him as well. I found those moments in every ordination I've been a part of. That's a really, really just powerful moment. And in our case, we had 7 men, we had over 200 concelebrants. It took a long time because each concelebrant had to lay his hand on each of the 7 men. So it takes a while. So the congregation doesn't know, do they stand? Do they sit? Do they take a nap? Is it time for concessions? Do they need to grab a box of Cracker Jacks? Like, what do you do at this time? But it is a really powerful moment to see all of these concelebrants, recently ordained concelebrants, young priests, very old priests, seeing the priests with canes or walkers make their way down that line to share their priesthood with these young men is a really, really powerful moment for me.
For me, the one I love follows just after this, after the laying on of hands. It comes the prayer of consecration, which Father Joseph Anthony was pointing out. That's where we get the essential words, the prayer that actually makes the man a priest, just like during the Mass. There are the words, "This is my body, this is my blood." Those are the sets of formulas that must be pronounced by the priest in order to confect the Eucharist. There's a prayer that must be prayed by the bishop in order to make a man a priest. So then after that prayer happens, the newly ordained priests are vested, because at that point they're actually priests. So at the conclusion of that prayer, they're all kneeling still before the bishop as he recites that prayer. They stand up, they're vested in priestly vestments for the first time. The stole, which goes underneath, hangs side to side, and then the chasuble. And once they have those vestments on, usually they're assisted by another priest, a friend, or a mentor. They present themselves in front of the bishop again, kneeling at his feet. He's sitting, and he anoints their hands. And that's the moment where a priest's hands become consecrated for his holy labors, with the sacred chrism oil, which is used in our baptism and our confirmation, also used here at priestly ordination. And then after that moment, we take the priests, the newly ordained priests, their hands still wet with the oil, and we take them into the sacristy, just to the side of the basilica there. And what happens next? Well, they have to dry their hands. And so we take a cloth that's been specially prepared for this purpose, a little strip of linen. And what I love about being an MC directing the ordinandi is I get to be the one to help them dry their hands at that moment. And that cloth is so special, of course, because, as many of you guys know, that's presented by the newly ordained priest to his mother in thanksgiving for everything that she's done for him. And as the old story goes, the mother presents the Maniturgium on her death to St. Peter at the gates of heaven. And when St. Peter asks on behalf of the Lord, what have you done for the kingdom? She says, I'm the mother of a priest. It's a lovely, lovely, lovely tradition. I love to dry the hands of these newly ordained priests because it's one of the first moments where they realize they're priests. It like dawns on them because we're giving them all these instructions and we're calling them all Father.
I know.
Their eyes light up. They just can't believe it.
This this most recent ordination this last week, I was positioned I was kind of the gopher. Like, as soon as they got their hands ordained or their hands chrismated, they closed their hands, stood up, walked out of the sanctuary, and I was the first one to greet them and then to show them to where you were stationed to help them dry their hands. And it was always really touching. Just look at them in the eyes, and I was like, "Follow me, Father." And then there was like, "Oh, oh, okay, it probably, and it all hits at that moment. Um, I
He's
remember,
talking to me.
yeah, exactly. I remember my ordination when it got to that moment. I didn't know what to do. I was like paralyzed. I was just like in a daze. The MC, like, I walked over, had my hands folded. I walked over to the station. The MC was like, "Okay, here you go. Like, kind of dry your hands." And I just stood there. And he goes, "Open your hands." And I opened them. He put the maniturgium in between my hands. He goes, "Close your hands." I close. He goes, "Now rub." And I was like, just because I was just in such a daze of what just happened. It was hilarious. I don't think we had anybody that bad this time around, was there?
No, they were grand, but very, very tender and very joyful. So, if friends, if you all have any other questions about the ordination mass, those are a little bit of our favorite parts, maybe what to
Mm-hmm.
expect. I would say the last thing that's lovely about the mass is when you get to hear several of the newly ordained chiming in the Eucharistic prayer.
Mm-hmm.
We had that
Mm-hmm.
one of our ordinati at that point, one of our recently ordained, one of our newly ordained
Ooh,
priests
well
joined in the
played.
Eucharistic prayer for the first time, and that was great to hear him saying the
Yeah,
prayers
yeah.
of the priest. So the first time you hear that voice of a new priest, all of which is very wonderful. So again, any questions about the ordination master, about the priesthood, we're happy to take them. We've got a few questions this evening from some of our Patreon supporters. These friends write in from Charlotte, North Carolina. Hello, fathers. I pray you are well. I write to you from the Diocese of Charlotte, which has been the subject of some consternation of late, to say the least. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
young Catholic of only 2 years, so I recognize that many of you have lived with the changes and conflict much longer than I. But do you have any advice on how to weather the storms of liturgical changes, particularly when they become not just confusing, but even offensive? Any practical or spiritual advice would be greatly appreciated. God's peace be with you, Justin and Beth. So just a real postage stamp
Yeah.
summary of what's going on in Charlotte. If listeners don't know, the local bishop there is just now bringing into effect some of the changes which have been made in the motu proprio that was issued by Pope Francis, called Traditionis Custodes. That document limits and specifies where regular celebrations of the traditional Latin Mass can occur. And in addition to enacting the reforms of Traditionis Custodes, there was another document released that was not only the changes of Traditionis Custodes, but it was a draft of some of the changes to the liturgy that the local bishop there in Charlotte had been thinking of making. So you have kind of two movements, two questions, two things to be talking about. One, the changes that were made, according to law,
Mm-hmm.
that are de jure, that are the prescriptions of Pope Francis, and then you have the second wave of things that weren't actually stated, but were in a kind of draft statement. So first, we could talk about the implementation of Traditionis Custodes. I mean, it's easy to say these things, but I'm not a diocesan ordinary. I wouldn't have chosen the current moment to enact Traditionis Custodes, but the local bishop there is following the law.
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Yeah.
the extension to implement the changes that are required according to the norms issued by Traditionis Custodes had been delayed there, and he's simply going ahead. Now, it could be someone else's prudential decision to have waited, but he didn't, and he's bringing things up to speed there. That is being received by many as a kind of violent act. Again, these things are very easy to say. I probably would have waited, but I'm not a diocesan bishop, and I don't have any plans to be one. So what I think is important about that is to say that this bishop is following the law of the church,
Yeah.
and he should
Yeah.
be supported in that, and that should be unequivocal. Now, when it comes to the second wave of things, those are not actually laws. They weren't
Mm-hmm.
promulgated, and I think the biggest concern that I have for anyone living there in Charlotte is that all kinds of expressions of malice or ill will might be attributed or directed to the bishop, which I think are both unjust and inappropriate, certainly
Mm-hmm.
for faithful sons and daughters. So the best piece of advice I can give is to not be worried about it, to allow the bishop, in consultation with his priests, to continue to move in harmony. Because unfortunately, I think one of the biggest fallouts from this could be that the people of Charlotte just start ignoring their bishop, and that would be a tragedy. To alienate or to isolate or otherwise disrespect. That's just not an option for us as Catholics. And so the biggest thing that I would emphasize is still finding ways to express docility and union in what is from the outside of a very difficult situation. I talked a lot about that. That's kind of a long answer. Father Joseph Anthony, do you have anything to add?
No, I really, really appreciate your kind of making the distinctions of the two separate actions that are going on here. One is an action that is within his purview. We could talk about the prudence of that, but at the end of the day, the first action is within his purview according to the laws and his rights and responsibilities as a diocesan ordinary. The second being this kind of draft document that has definitely captured the majority of people's attention and talking about specific implementations. The reality is the diocesan bishop is the chief liturgist of his diocese, and that's the role he has. But that's always in line with the universal, liturgical norms and things like that. And I think when people started looking at this draft document, it seemed to be in conflict, and it was problematic and confusing. I would say probably confusing, especially in the Diocese of Charlotte. Luckily, I think we can say that luckily it is a draft document. It does not carry the force of law. These are not norms that are being currently implemented. And so it can kind of cause hesitation or things like that. But just like you were saying, that it is radically important for us to always be in union with our local bishops. And the risk is to kind of create a distrust there, or for the people of Charlotte to no longer follow their bishop because of what got leaked as a draft document or things like that. So I think it's definitely a cause for pause, but to remind ourselves that none of this was actually enacted for the diocese. It was a draft document that got leaked, and to let it be what that is, and to recognize that whatever was in that draft document, all the specifics of it, were not enforced in any way. And so there's not necessarily anything that they actually have to deal with at this moment, but to just kind of see that as remind ourselves of the realities that we have to live in, and that this is not being enforced at this moment.
Yeah, I'd say pray for your bishop, pray for your priest.
Yep.
Those are two spiritual councils, obviously. But for practical counsels, write to him. Tell him respectfully what you think. I can assure you that bishops do actually like hearing from and engaging with their people.
Yeah.
Okay, Kimberly says, every time I see the part where men lay on the floor face down with their arms stretched out, it just gives me goosebumps. There's something about it that's so incredibly beautiful. What did that feel like? Father Joseph Anthony?
It was cold. The marble's cold. That's what I remember. I remember crying a lot in that moment. So yeah, we lay on the floor with our arms in a cruciform shape at our profession. And then at our ordination, we have a slightly different posture, but still similar thing, prostrate, face on the ground. And we do that as the Litany of Saints is being sung, right? So the entire church is singing to the saints and asking for their intercession for this moment. And it's a really beautiful hymn, and each and every invocation is calling down the prayers and intercession of that specific saint. And I just remember recognizing how not isolated I was, how in communion I was with hearing the voices of the cantor, hearing the voices of the entire congregation in response, hearing each and every saint being invoked at that moment, realizing this is not my own work and the entire burden of all this isn't on my shoulders, but I'm deeply in union and communion with many, many others, both on this earth and in heaven. And it was very comforting in that way. Isolation is the greatest evil. It's the greatest goal of the evil one, is to create isolation. So in that moment where we are prostrate on the ground invoking the saints, it is almost the complete antithesis of isolation, and is a very strong comfort. So emotional that you end up bawling your eyes out in a puddle of tears on the ground.
We got the mop out. It was fine. The Kimberly, the moment that I thought of was it took me back to the vestition ceremony. So when friars receive the habit, we present ourselves in front of the local superior in Cincinnati, the prior of the novitiate, and we ask for God's mercy, and then we lay prostrate on the ground. And that happens before we receive the habit. So it's actually like the first formal act of a friar joining the order is to ask for God's mercy and then to lay down one's life. And so I was thinking of that, and I was thinking, of course, of the verse of Scripture where we're encouraged to lay down our lives, where our Lord says, "I no longer call you slaves, but friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you." And then we're instructed to lay down our lives for our friends. It's such a beautiful passage in the Last Supper discourses. I was thinking of that, which was just really a special moment. One from Odalis here. Odalis, great to hear from you. Book club question: Is a general confession recommended at least once in your life? Do you receive more graces from a general confession? And if a general confession is to wipe away all sins, provided you're not intentionally leaving something out, then why do one? All right, so general confessions come from, to the best of my knowledge, a more modern Catholic spirituality. It's not a thing practiced by Dominicans historically in Dominican spirituality. I think that one of the things that some people are concerned about if you make a general confession is that you bring up a number of things, in the practice of a general confession, you bring up a number of things that you have already mentioned in confession. So one concern about a general confession is that some priests will say, well, you're encouraging people to reconfess their sins, and you're undermining the power of the sacrament of confession, because once a sin is confessed, it is forgiven, and there's no need to reconfess it. Well, that's not entirely true. You can renew your contrition for sins in the confessional. So you can ask for you can renew your contrition. You can ask for an outpouring of grace as you profess a sorrow for a past sin. So that's a legitimate and ancient spiritual practice. So I just wanted to get that out of the way because I thought that would come up. So some people will recommend it. Some people will recommend a general confession before a major event, before receiving sacrament of marriage or before being ordained or that kind of thing. But that's really all I have to say about it. Yeah, not really a big deal in our tradition.
No, I think with respect to general confessions, I don't think you shouldn't make a general confession like every year or anything like that. And I definitely agree with you that like the practice of people making a general confession as if it's like a safety net. Oh, let me make a general confession. That way I cover everything and just make sure I don't miss anything. Like we want to stay away from that practice, just as that tends towards scrupulosity in those types of things, that we have to make sure that we're actually confessing individual acts that we really did and not just generalized principles or things like that. You mentioned life moments, right? Vocational moments, whether that's before a priesthood, before marriage, or things like that. It may be helpful to just kind of reflect on the totality of one's life, renewing one's sorrow for past sins, but to always, always, always be mindful. If it has been confessed previously, it has been forgiven. That's it. So these things may be appropriate spiritual practices to reflect on God's mercy and grace at individual moments, but it's not as if we need to reconfess these things as a form to be actually prepared. If we make any sacramental confession, even approximate one, is appropriate preparation for any reception of the sacrament, whether that's a sacrament we receive repeatedly, like the Blessed Sacrament in the Eucharist, or if it's a one-time sacrament like marriage or ordination, a proper sacramental confession is sufficient.
Well, fantastic. We can move on here. This comes from Marie, who asks, how top of mind was the vow of celibacy leading up to and on the days of your ordinations? Was it mentally just a piece of the larger framework of the solemnity of being ordained, or was it uniquely more difficult to reckon with than the other vows and such? That's a great question. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I would say, for me, Marie, I would say that I wasn't really thinking of it because I had already considered my life as having reached an absolute state at solemn profession. So in order to be ordained a priest in the Dominican order, you have to first make solemn vows in the Dominican order. So I was thinking of that, though, when I professed my solemn vows. And it's like, well, I guess there's no going back from this. I won't be married after this day, that kind of thing. I was definitely thinking about it, some at solemn vows, but not really my priestly ordination, honestly. What about you, Father Joseph Anthony?
So similar. I mean, that was probably the question at my solemn vows. When it came to ordination, I had gone through solemn vows, made my vows until death. And then in my ordination to the diaconate, we also make a promise of celibacy at that. And so then when it comes time for your priestly ordination, you've kind of already been living that way for, underneath, solemn vows and that for at least 2.5 years or so by that point. So it wasn't necessarily at the forefront of my mind because I'd already dealt with it years ahead of that. I think things at the forefront of my mind were more about the sacrament of the Mass, sacrament of the Eucharist, and hearing confessions. Those were the things. It was like, okay, now the rest of my life changes because I can say Mass and I can hear confessions. Those were the things that were kind of forefront in my mind on my priestly ordination.
Awesome. This comes from Kathy. She asks, what is the protocol for when a priest is promoted to Monsignor, Bishop, Cardinal, etc.? You want to start
He's
that?
got to do a crossword puzzle in less than 5 minutes. No. What is it? What is the protocol for being elevated to Monsignor?
Maybe start by just giving us the different ranks here of Monsignor, Bishop, and Cardinal.
So
what each of those ranks mean.
Monsignor, Bishop, and Cardinal. Monsignor and Cardinal are two of those kind of ranks that are honorific titles. So they don't really change that much. It's just a title that denotes some kind of service or dedication to the church in a specific way that has gone, let's call it extraordinary, gone above and beyond the ordinary expectations of a priest or a bishop, and thus an honorific title will be bestowed on that person. So in the case of a priest, if it goes above and beyond given responsibilities and duties, they would receive the title of Monsignor. Now that is for diocesan priests. You do not find religious priests such as us as Dominicans. We do not get the titles of Monsignor. That's not part of our tradition or anything like that. Now, the difference between bishop and priest is actually a little bit of a change. We speak of the bishop as having the fullness of the priesthood, which is unique because most people think that a priest has the fullness of his priesthood, but actually the bishop has the fullness of the priesthood. And the unique element of a bishop is that he is the ordinary minister of two sacraments, which are confirmation and ordination. A priest can be delegated according to his pastoral responsibilities. If he is a pastor, he can confirm those in his parish in either extraordinary or ordinary circumstances. But the bishop is the ordinary minister. And this is why you see bishops go on their confirmation tours through their diocese in the springtime and things like that. But the really, really unique thing that cannot be delegated to a priest is the ordination of priest. So it is up to a bishop to ordain men to the diaconate and to the priesthood. And we speak of that as now being the fullness of the priesthood. And so the unique element of those kind of different ranks is Monsignor is being an honorific title of a diocesan priest, a bishop being a man who has now had the fullness of his priesthood, meaning that he can now be the ordinary member, ordinary minister of the sacraments of confirmation and ordination, and then a cardinal being an honorific title of a bishop in that way.
Yeah. So then, as far as how that works, that's great, Father Joseph Anthony. Thanks for laying it out. Usually, a bishop proposes a man to recognize as a Monsignor. Now, Pope Francis restricted, he placed an age restriction on who could be named a Monsignor. Didn't like the idea of young men getting this title. So that's been, that the number of Monsignors created has been greatly reduced in the last 12 years. So bishop would propose to the Pope a man to be named a Monsignor for his diocese. Bishops are named through an extensive process.
Yes.
There are different levels of investigation that happen. People who know the man are consulted around, and the nuncio essentially proposes 3 names to the Pope, and the Pope chooses from one of them. That's kind of the fastest way that it happens. That would be the typical way, where there's some research done on a man. The nuncio says, I think these 3 men would be great. And then he proposes names to the Holy Father. The Holy Father can choose those names. He can choose someone else. And then when it comes to cardinals, those are made directly by the Holy Father. So bishops name monsignors, nuncios help make bishops, and popes make cardinals. That does for a kind of cartoon version of it. That's all true enough anyway. You can say a lot more about these things.
I was going to say, that's a really quick, that's a really quick and postcard version, but that covers it really. It really does.
Heather jumps in here with a thank you. Oh, thanks, Heather. We're happy.
Thank you to you, Heather.
We get 10 Mr. Chicken 2. Hello, fathers. What's up, dude? Thanks for joining us. This is great.
It's crack-a-lackin', homie.
And apparently he's got a vocation to be Dominican. This is fabulous. He says, I believe Father Patrick knows the Irish vocations director, Father Benedict McGlinchey. Facts, straight facts, because I spent an awesome week with Father Benedict in Alabama. We were preaching a parish mission this Lent at the cathedral. That's there. Hilarious. And we almost got destroyed by a tornado. Anyway, our boy here is starting his formal discernment with the Irish Dominican province next week. Any tips? Well, Father Benedict is a lawyer, so you best dot your I's and cross your T's. I think that's make sure you're ready. No, he's a great man, and we'll be praying for you. Join the Dominicans. Why not? It's the best.
I think my advice for that is to actually follow your advice. Follow the advice of your vocation director.
Do what he tells you.
Do what he tells you. And the reason being is, like, this is what the Lord has asked out of this priest for this time being. So whether it's the vocation director, whether it's the novice master or student master, that you can trust the guidance of these individuals because they're given the grace to do that job. So follow his advice. And if he's saying, okay, we need you to, get this paperwork in or things like that, or like, okay, we need a little more time here and there. It's not just a personal attack, but you can trust and follow his advice because that's the task that the Lord has asked for him at that moment. And he receives the grace to do that and to do that well. So yeah, follow his advice. And this may be your first time going through this process. It's not his, so you can follow his, as he steps you through the entire process.
Awesome. Okay, what we got next? We got Mr. Newton willing in here. Nice problem to have. Oh, that was about all the priests. Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
All the priests, all the vocations, taking a long time at the laying on of hands. That was awesome. Blunt Lens says, I sometimes think about being a priest. What made you guys choose the vocation? Father Joseph Anthony, you want to start, and then
I would say it took meeting good priest. Like I was lucky enough to have good priest in my life, and I met good priest, and it was through their life, their example, that I recognized that it could be possible for me too. Like I could do that because I actually met good priest. I do think at the end of the day that a vocation is an intimate thing. It's heart speaking to heart, our hearts, the Lord's heart speaking to our hearts, and that has to be done in a relationship. So we have to see other men, other good priests living that out well. And I I think at the end of the day, that's what kind of not only provoked the question in my life, but also helped to guide me in answering that and encouraging me to be courageous in answering that as well, was the actual example in life of good priests themselves.
Yeah, true that was very much the same for me. I had amazing parish priests growing up, and then when I met the Dominicans, I had a fabulous professor in college who came into my life at a crucial moment, and I wanted to be like him as best I could.
Yeah.
So I became a Dominican. Tim says, seems like a true treasure I haven't had the chance to experience yet. Yeah, if you get the chance to go to an ordination mass, go. I remember going to them growing up because there were seminarians who had served at our parish in the summer who were being ordained.
Oh, wow.
And my mother wanted to go and drug me. Classic. So thanks, Mom. But I remember them being very beautiful.
I mean,
Alice,
I think the first ordination mass I went to was when I was a seminarian. So, yeah, I had not been to one until I had already entered seminary. So if you get the opportunity, definitely go for it. Buckle up. It's going to be a long mass. This is not a 45-minute mass. So just know what you're getting yourself into, but enjoy it. Take it in. It's a beautiful, beautiful time to pray.
Allison says, I've heard that receiving a blessing from a newly ordained priest has special significance. If this is true, can you explain? Yes, it's because when you're ordained a priest, you can bless things. And deacons can technically bless things, but they have to follow prescribed rituals. They're bound by the rubrics of the church. So the power to bless something as a deacon is constrained according to the form and structure of the thing and the rites for blessing. But when you're a priest, you could just bless anything. It's like
shoot from the hip,
the cool power of the priesthood, which comes from the priest's relationship to Christ the head. So the newly ordained priest can bless things, but also the blessing of a newly ordained priest for many years was an indulgence act by the church. Today, the indulgence is connected to attending the priest's mass of thanksgiving after his ordination. So there was an indulgence connected to receiving the blessing from a priest. Now you still get an indulgence, but it's just the indulgence of a blessing. It's not the full plenary indulgence that was once connected. Okay, but that practice lives on in the memory of the people of God. Thanks be to God. Yes. I think it's a great example of the sensus fidei. One of the things that happened at our ordination mass is Archbishop Fisher received the blessings of the newly ordained priests at the conclusion of the mass before he gave the final blessing. So you see this done sometimes. And after he received the blessing, he grabbed the priest's hands and kissed them. And it's the sign of reverence for the hands that had just been anointed. So that was very deeply moving to see that on Thursday.
I remember when we were ordained, we went out to our Dominican monastery in Linden, Virginia. Shout out to our nuns out in Linden. And we celebrated a massive Thanksgiving for the sisters there because they had prayed us through formation to our ordination day. And then at the end of that mass, they opened up the gates and let us into the kind of cloistered side of the chapel so that we could walk down the line and give our first blessing to all the sisters. And I remember having these cloistered sisters kiss my hands, and I was like, that's too much. That's too much. I can't do this. That is so humbling at that, but it's a really beautiful tradition. And like you said, I'm so happy that the faithful have this as part of their devotion and love for Christ through his priest and through his priesthood. I think it's really, really important and beautiful.
Boom. Bob the Builder says the response in Charlotte has been very uncharitable and people certainly need to chill out. The worst part is that the loudest responses often are extremely ill-informed on liturgical law and norms. I agree with this, actually. And I think that there's a lot of things that are said about what the liturgy requires by people who don't really know. And I think in Charlotte, there were a lot of people weighing in who are not part of the Charlotte diocese,
yes.
who seem to be very concerned in what's going on there for reasons that elude me. So I agree that that another practical response could be to simply, in humility, study the rubrics of the liturgy.
Yeah.
Rather than declaring, a kind of knowledge from on high.
But I think, no, that's so important. I think it's really beautiful what you said. In humility, study the rubrics of the liturgy. In humility, read these documents, not as a way to weaponize them and give you some kind of arrogance and authority. Look, I know the documents. I can source text and cite it, but like actually in humility, read these things and see how they're guiding us to, and understand the liturgical principles on how it's supposed to foster us and move us closer to the Lord, and not just to study these texts as a way to kind of, impose them on people with a certain type of violence and stricture in that way. Because I find a lot of people, when these questions come up, they'll go back to the text and they'll try to, find a citation that they can then beat people over their heads with it. And it's like, no, actually read these things in humility is a nice thing.
Yeah, and charity. I like the good point, Father. Uncle Gus jumps in. He says, here's a rookie question. Friar, monk, priest, are they all the same thing? Is there an overlap, sets and subsets? Jump in there, Father.
Okay, here we go. Friar, monk, priest. Okay, friar is referring to those men of a religious order that are typically mendicant religious orders. So this was a new style of religious consecration that came up in the medieval ages, which we are a part of, and mendicant means beggar. So these were the religious orders that typically lived their life in begging for their daily bread. You can think of Dominicans, Franciscans, Carmelites. Those are going to be your most common friars. So a friar is a man who is a vowed member of a mendicant religious order. There's a lot of qualifiers, but that's what that means. A monk is a vowed member of a monastic order. Now, a monastic order means they're a little earlier form of a religious tradition, a religious order tradition, going back mostly to Saint Benedict. So when Saint Benedict wrote his Rule of Life, the Rule of Saint Benedict, kind of forming men in their consecration to God, living in common with each other as a kind of rule of life, it took the form of what we call a monastic life. And so a monk is a vowed member of a monastic order. So these are all the different forms and branches of a Benedictine life. So you have Benedictines, Cistercians, Trappist, all of these different types of things. So any man who is a vowed member of a monastic order would be considered a monk. Lastly, you have a priest. The difference between friars, monks, and priests are friars and monks, the men who join religious orders, are not sacraments. So that is, joining a religious order, making vows, solemn vows in a religious order is actually not a sacrament. There's only 7 sacraments in religious orders. Religious consecration is not a sacrament. The priesthood, holy orders, is a sacrament. And so there can be members of a religious order, monastic or mendicant, that then are on top of their religious consecration, are ordained to the sacramental or ministerial priesthood. And so this is why you have both friars and monks who have received the holy orders, the sacrament of holy orders, being priest. You may also have members of those religious orders who are not ordained, and they don't have to be ordained. But the difference there is both the style of religious life in monks and friars, and then the difference between religious consecration and vows and the sacrament of holy orders with respect to the priesthood in there. So, does that cover it all?
Good intro.
Yeah,
totally. Yo, Padres, what's good? Your mama's boy.
Yo,
says.
Mama's boy, what's happening?
Your mama's boy. Your mama's boy.
We talking about practice out here? Practice? Not a game. Not a game.
He says, is it just me or does it feel like a sigh of relief to be back in ordinary time?
Dude.
I mean, I could do with an octave this week. I'm not gonna lie. I could do with a little Pentecost octave. But I did have that feeling today when the brother chose the hymn for morning prayer, and it was just something totally norming out of the Breviary. I was like, great, 3 verses and we're out of here. This is perfect.
Yes. I love ordinary time. I'm a weirdo. I like the green. Green's my favorite color, so I'm happy to look like Kermit the Frog when I say mass. But yeah, I'm happy to be back in ordinary time too. It's fun.
Here we go. Tim's with me. I kind of would like an octave of Pentecost.
True.
Red Easter seems really cool to me. Nice.
Red Easter. I like that 40, term, Red Easter.
40 days of Pentecost, yeah. Coming to you from Tim. But hey, see, I'm on the same page as Mr. Newton. The hymns are way easier to sing in ordinary time. It's true. Uncle Gus asks, can a religious priest become a bishop in any circumstances? The answer to that is yes, it happens all the time. And depending on the influence of a religious order in a particular region, sometimes the church will prefer to draw members of that order to be bishops of that region. So for the friars historically in Latin America, this is very much the case, because there was a kind of strategy in Mexico and in many of the other countries in Latin America where geographic area was kind of divided up among the different religious orders. And so for a long time, there would have been a member of that order serving also as bishop. But it's a kind of theft, like the man feels stolen from the order. That's the word that Archbishop Fisher used when he was talking about it to us last week. He said, before I was stolen from the Dominicans and made a diocesan bishop. So,
it's interesting because when he's made a bishop, he, especially as a diocesan bishop, so if he's the diocesan ordinary, then he has to actually own property on behalf of the diocese and things like that. So there's actually some kind of canonical adjustments where he's released from elements of the vow of poverty and things like that because he has to act on behalf of the church. So it is a little interesting when a religious is made a diocesan priest, specifically or not diocesan priest, a diocesan bishop, specifically the ordinary there. But a fun fact is that the very first Dominican in the United States, Archbishop Edward Dominic Fenwick, was actually named the first archbishop or the first bishop of the Diocese of Cincinnati. When the early days of our country, when that diocese was formed, it was given to a Dominican friar, the very first Dominican friar in the United States. So we have a history of that even in our own nation and our order as well.
Okay, so I actually know this, Father Joseph Anthony. Well, the first part anyway. I just attended a Dominican Rite Mass. Do you know the symbolism of the deacon incensing under the chasuble of the priest and exposing the paten at the Pater Noster? Okay, I know the first part of that. Do you?
No, I don't. I have some.
Okay. Yeah. So the first, I have no idea what's going on with the paten. The deacon does like all kinds of crazy things with the paten. The Dominican Rite, it's all super cool. I have no idea what it means. The reason he incenses under the chasuble is practical. Because you don't want to destroy beautiful vestments by like getting all kinds of smoke gunk on them. So he lifts it up to protect the design of the vestment. And in the Dominican Rite, we would have always worn these big Gothic things. It wouldn't have been a simple fiddleback. And then the symbolic interpretation, therefore, is that there's a hiddenness to the priesthood, that the priest serving at the Mass is cloaked with Christ. So you get those things going on there. The Dominicans, Tim says, are to God what the Yankees are to baseball. Well, okay, yeah, you like that Yankee stuff.
Yeah, now that I'm in New York City, I've planted my flag in Yankee soil. So go Yankees. Pinstripe Mafia, here we go.
Bob the Builder's coming in with a hot life tip here. This is good. Yeah, as one of those guys that was slobbered on, if you ever get a blessing from a newly ordained priest, kiss their hands, lips closed so you don't slobber him. That's good.
Pro tip.
Oh, and he backs it up with evidence. Cleanest uniform, legendary players, coolest nicknames. All right, I'm there for the nicknames. They do have the best nicknames. Yeah. Uncle Gus. Well, we tried, Uncle Gus. Yeah. There's stuff going on. Pray for them. Bob the Buildist, he's got some news for us. He says, I'm headed to NYC to teach with the Seton Fellows. Hey, oh, that's great. Welcome.
That's great. Yeah.
Yes. We're here. You'll be here. Friars will be here. Come.
Jesus is here. Is amazing. We're big fans of him, so it'll work out.
It's the best. Crystal says, it was amazing being there. Oh, you were with us. Nice. We're very happy about that.
Oh, wonderful.
Dominican Sisters of Fatima. Excellent. Join. Why not? Do it. Be a Dominican. Pray for me and my discernment. You bet.
Absolutely.
Lisa says, hello, all from the UK. Oh, my goodness. It's late over there.
Yeah.
Hi to you, too, Lisa. Thanks for tuning in. Uncle Gus says, awesome. Ooh, there we go. What's the general mix of priests to non-priests within monastic mendicant orders? Followed up with another good question. Uncle Gus is dropping them in tonight.
Yeah, I know. So majority of, you'll find different religious orders have different traditions. There are some religious orders that are more of an what we call clerical orders, which means it's an order of clerics, or would be considered priests, ordained men. Dominican order is an order of clerics. So we are pretty top heavy in that way, as most of us are ordained priests, where we have a small percentage of brothers who are not ordained. Franciscans, their tradition was to be an order of brothers. So that's another mendicant tradition, but St. Francis established them as a brotherhood. And then a few of them would be ordained in order to be in service of the brothers. So you see that they're kind of split sometimes like 50-50. In a modern tradition, they're still pretty top heavy. Once you get into some of the monastic traditions, that's where you see that there's a few priests ordained for the benefit of the monastery and the brothers there, but that's more of a non-ordained experience of life and commitment there. So that's where you'll see a lot of men who are attracted to a monastic order, not necessarily pursuing sacramental ordination to the priesthood, but that they're attracted to the monastic side and not necessarily ordained in that way. So you have some of the orders that are clerical orders, which would be like a Dominican order, which are mostly ordained men into the priesthood, or you will have orders that are more fraternal, like the Franciscans, that are not necessarily ordained, and then you have monastics as well.
Yeah, I have no idea if this is true or not, but that's not going to stop me from speculating wildly. I feel like in the past there were fewer ordained priests in these religious communities. There were many more members that were professed brothers. That's certainly the case even in the Dominicans, but we were always, as Father Joseph Anthony pointed out, first a clerical institute. Josie DeMartin writes in, "Hey fathers, I have to write a paper on the efficacy of the sacraments and salvation outside the church." In the same paper? I don't know how you're going to do that.
Yeah, that's not a one paper thing. 5 pages, double spaced. Get it done.
Any recs for sources? Well, I think for sacraments, I mean, I'd recommend. Oh my gosh, and the name of it is just escaping. Father Joseph Anthony, what's that amazing introduction to the sacraments that we're always talking about?
Introduction to the Sacraments. Oh gosh, gosh, my mind is you're putting me on the spot.
That's all right. It'll come to me later. So, I mean, without even knowing what that can be easily understood, without even knowing what level be at.
I would say this is not what you're thinking of. Okay, but there's a book out there by Matthew Levering and Michael Dalphanius, I forget his name, called Rediscovering Aquinas in the Sacraments. It's like 7 chapters. Each chapter is on each one of the sacraments with an overlooking thing. I remember reading that in undergrad, and that helped me to understand kind of sacramental things. And that's a kind of a quick read. It might be out of print, so it might be hard to find, but I just looked that up because I was like, I know that's one. Yeah, what's the other one that I?
What is it? Meeting Christ? Is it Meeting Christ in the Sacraments? Is that what I'm trying to come up with?
By
Coleman O'Neill. Ha! No, got it. Just thought of it. Man, that was really terrible. That's a great book about the sacraments. Meeting Christ in the Sacraments by Father Coleman O'Neill, who's a Dominican sacramental theologian. Really, really, really wonderful book.
I knew we had to talk it out.
It's the go-to text. It just caused me, like I just have to suffer enough pain and embarrassment so that you all know that I'm real, and then I can come up with the thing that I'm trying to think of. For salvation outside the church, documents of the Second Vatican Council, I would say
Lumen Gentium.
Just for for something to start.
Yeah.
Boom. Okay, what else we got? Some more from Uncle Gus. Dominicans have their own rite at Mass. I didn't know that was a thing. Yeah, dude, we were formed before Trent, where
back in the
Mass
day,
was
baby.
regularized. We get a thank you from Uncle Gus. Going off that question, what was the rationale behind getting rid of the distinctive habit of the Dominican lay brother? So the idea, as it's been explained to us, Michael, was to emphasize the commonly held fraternity of all the friars. So the habit was thought to to be exclusionary, and that by all wearing the same thing, it would underscore the common and fundamental bond of fraternity. Um, I can think of one friar who joined before the Second Vatican Council who insisted on being buried in the old habit still, which was a right that the order still afforded the brothers who had joined before the council. It was kind of a lovely thing. We get a God bless you. Thank you. God bless you too. I'm a Mets fan, Tim says, but with God, I'd like to be on a living team. Nice. Hey, perfect. We're happy for you to be here. Technically, there's no salvation outside the church, but yeah, let's not split hairs. Nice. Well done.
Right, yeah, we're gonna end on that,
true.
right? Yeah.
That's so good. Nothing's gonna be better. Well, friends, thank you for joining us tonight as we chat through the priesthood and many other questions. For those interested in resources, like we said, you should turn to Coleman O'Neill's book on the sacraments, which has a lot to say about holy orders. It's very beautiful. Since that came up, why not give it the old recommend again? And we also ask that you would pray for us. Please know that we're praying for you. God bless.